Coming off a big recruiting weekend, can Nebraska capitalize?
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
Welcome back. Did you miss us? We're here. It's Monday, June 9th. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. Last week, we did not have any podcasts.
No. I'll take full responsibility for this. Mitch was out of town. He was like, he didn't even know what day it was until like 5 seconds ago. He still might not know what day it is. So that was a planned, vacation. And then I was getting back from Arkansas, and I put out a tweet. I put out a tweet on like Wednesday. I was like, hey, proof of life, we're still alive, from the Locked On Nebraska account. I was like, we're still alive and we're going to do a podcast. And then I once again did not do a podcast. So take this as an apology, but also we're going to make it up because we're going to be doing, more over the next couple of weeks to make up for the fact that we missed the entirety of last week. So here we are.
We are fresh. We are here to go. You've been listening to other people wax on about Nebraska football camps and how big they were last week, and the boneyard thing that happened on Friday night that I know basically nothing about because I was out of the country and had no internet access or very limited internet access. You guys have been hearing about this house settlement thing that passed on Friday at like 10 o'clock Eastern time for who knows what reason in the timing. And we haven't weighed in on it all. If you missed our mailbag, we're going to be back with one of those on Friday to read your questions from 2 weeks of mailbag submissions. So thanks for sticking with us. Yes, I was completely out of commission. Connor texted me yesterday like, hey, should we do a pod again? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, what's going on? And he's like, you may have noticed I haven't done any. And I said, no, I have not noticed that because I've been totally unplugged, which is a great thing to do in the first week of June after a long stretch of Nebraska and college sports content just smashing your head into the wall.
No, I think we picked a good week for it, honestly. Like when you pull out the entire week, or the entire year, and you just look at it in like weeks, I mean, really nothing happened until the end of the week. They had a big recruiting event, which we're going to talk about, and then the house settlement thing on Friday, which we weren't going to get to till today's episode anyway. So I think we deserve pats on the back for missing last week. Honestly, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
I'm actually so I was on a cruise ship for the majority of the time. There were days where we got off, and it's great to be back on solid ground, but I'm so fresh off the boat that I feel like there are walls and the ground below me is moving. I noticed it this morning as I was brushing my teeth like 15 minutes ago. I just rolled out of bed and we're doing this, and I'm still having a hard time getting over that bizarre feeling like I'm still out in the Caribbean somewhere.
Okay.
If any of my takes are just like completely off base today, it's that.
Okay. Well, let me introduce you to a couple things, because I have a little bit more of my bearings about me here, considering I haven't been on a boat for the last entire 8 days. So Nebraska held a big recruiting event. They had nearly, I think, 10 official visitors on campus this past weekend, 8, 9, 10 official visitors. We're talking about guys that they're after for the 2026 class. And then aside from that, they had a large 7-on-7 tournament that they really blew it out for, right? I mean, they had like a small LED like video board in the.
Cam Newton was there.
Cam Newton was wearing his giant hats, and he was there. There was so much going on, and then of course, part of that was 2027 quarterback commit Trey Taylor, and he decided he was going to play. So he jumped on with a team that eventually ended up winning it, a team that just so happens to have like a borderline 5-star recruit for the 2027 class, and that they offered him in basketball as well. Ahmad Hudson is that kid's name, and that was one of his deals. And then there was another like big huddle event that happened as well. So it was a big weekend in Lincoln. And so basically, what I wanted to, the details aside, and there are details, but it's basically what that is. What I just explained there. I think there in each of the previous however many coaching staffs, we have sort of reached this point where it feels like people will come in from the outside who are unfamiliar with the program, and they'll say, look at all this. This is amazing what Nebraska has. They got an opportunity to really show off their facility for the first time, for the first big weekend. I shouldn't say for the first, but really to a whole new set of people.
In this month, this is the month in the 2026 recruiting calendar right here. Nebraska's put all of its eggs in this basket, and that was the kickoff last Friday.
And so there was a bunch of national recruiting people on campus, and they all said the same thing. They were like, "Wow, I mean, this is really amazing what Nebraska has here," and they are really creating some momentum, and they have their foot in the door with all these 2027 and 2028 and whatever prospects. They still need to get going on 2026, by the way. But it's the same thing every time. And and what happens at this point is you either win games or it doesn't matter. and that's a weird thing to talk about in June because they can't win another game for a couple months here. But this is a really big opportunity for Nebraska to capitalize on some good things that they have going behind the scenes. They just need to get it going on the field.
Okay, so my coming in out of the darkness take on this is Ahmad Hudson. He is the number one tight end in the country in the 2027 recruiting class. 6'6.5", 230 pounds. I don't know how children get that large when they're 16 years old, but this is hard for me because my kid's 14 and there's nobody in his group.
Not 6'6". Yeah.
Okay. So he plays basketball. He plays football. He caught some touchdowns from Trey Taylor, who, by the way, before I get to this take, Trey Taylor, has any Nebraska football recruit ever had the kind of experience long before signing a letter of intent or just before signing a letter of intent, period, that Trey Taylor did over the last several days in Lincoln? He's going into his junior year of high school outside of Chicago, and he's already like moved in at Nebraska, was there for the whole week, was like, there's a picture of him this morning with like the whole coaching staff, which I guess has happened before, but dude was like signing autographs alongside Dylan Raiola at Memorial Stadium on the field the other night. This is kind of unprecedented for Nebraska. And Dylan didn't have a chance to be in that position because he wasn't committed to Nebraska up until the very end. But even when he did come to Nebraska as a known commodity, it wasn't like that. Yeah, he posed for pictures and things like that, but Taylor was out there throwing touchdowns to 5-star tight ends before his junior year of high school and like waving the Nebraska flag, saying, "This is my future home." Like, let's stop for a second and just like put some significance on what that is before we talk about Ahmad Hudson and this cast of potential Nebraska targets or actual Nebraska targets that are uncommitted.
They have a really good, a really, really great advocate for Nebraska football right now. He's basically on the staff, as we've said before. I mean, he's done that really, really well. And yeah, no, I mean, if this continues to build over the next year plus, and he stays committed to Nebraska, I mean, they have a really, really good weapon in their side pocket as far as recruiting is concerned.
So Hudson, the question for Nebraska is, how do they get Ahmad Hudson to not be the next Micah Parsons, who came in several years ago and lit up a Friday Night Lights and went on to start him in the NFL and at Penn State, or the next Brandon Baker, who was the offensive tackle from California a couple years ago that was interested in Nebraska and used Nebraska to boost his social media and YouTube profile and all that, because Nebraska's got this, and now it's even like several steps higher. In the past, Nebraska had this cool kind of vibe, this profile of this program with all of these fancy bells and whistles, but now they took these players into the new Osborne complex, not the old Osborne complex, the new Osborne complex, with the incredible dining experience and the walkthrough room, and they saw everything, and they got the whole grand tour. So how do you take Ahmad Hudson and these guys who were in on Friday and get them to the point where they're not Micah Parsons or Brandon Baker and end up going to other schools and become Dylan Raiola, like at Nebraska, without the family connection that played a huge role in getting Dylan, the 5-star, to sign with Nebraska?
I love the idea that Nebraska is in on these guys. Like, that's great.
Yeah, it's great.
And we should, you should give credit, because you're still a year or two out from these guys ending up on a college campus, right? So, like, sure, that's great. The first step is to be in on them. The first step is to be in the conversation before their recruiting really takes off. But in order to stay in the conversation, you have to win games. And then ultimately, it doesn't make a difference how many times Nebraska finishes second for a 4 or 5-star recruit, or third for a 4 or 5-star recruit, or in the top 5 for a 4 or 5-star recruit. They got to get them. And so that's kind of the point we're at right now. I think it's a real, like, it's sort of an inflection point, right? You have to do this stuff. You have to be good at showing off your facilities, and Nebraska's great at it, and they have great ones, and the people on campus and all the stuff that you get as a Nebraska football player. But ultimately, they're not going to get any of those, many of those guys, if they don't show it on the field, because their offers are to the best programs in the country. So Nebraska has to stack up with that somehow, and they have to have some proof of performance that this is going to really work under Matt Rhule.
One thought, and we'll take a break, but I saw that Nebraska invited in some of the national people from sites and networks that cover recruiting intensely on 3 24/7. And, those people, of course, had glowing things to say. Nebraska's is a giant awakening and such type of comments. And you heard the same kind of stuff from Hudson, and he wasn't the only one. He's just the one we're using as an example because he had the connection with Taylor. They produced touchdowns during the 7-on-7 tournament. The thing is, like, all of those people, like, the next day or the next week are moving on to Ohio State. Like, Nebraska feels really good on Friday night and Saturday as all of this stuff is coming out about how wonderful the experience was in Lincoln. But then on Monday or Tuesday, tomorrow, like, they're in Columbus, Ohio, and they're seeing it again. Very similar, whatever the experience is. Maybe there's not a 7-on-7 tournament, but that doesn't matter. And they've got a national championship trophy from January. So it's still a hill to climb for Nebraska, and they've got to find a way to get to the top. And you're totally right, Connor. It involves winning. So this story from last Friday night is to be continued on September 20th. On September 20th, when Michigan comes into town, that's when we know, maybe sooner, maybe there'll be a commitment. But even if you got to hold on to the commitment. Like, the real work is to be done on Saturdays in the fall.
No doubt about it. All right, quick timeout. The House settlement. It's settled. What does it mean? Coming up next.
I can do this here. Let's go like this.
But before we do that, a quick word from our friends at the FanDuel Sportsbook, where the NBA playoffs are indeed in full swing, and we're knotted up in the finals every night in the finals, delivering highlight-worthy performances, of course, including game 1 of the finals, a little less so in game 2, but we want you to get in on the action. The best way to do that is with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Tyrese Halliburton, right? He's showing up in the biggest and brightest lights. So you can make your way into the FanDuel Sportsbook. And if you got an angle on that, player props, you jump right in, and that is your entry point. How about $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. There you go. There's only a limited time to do so, of course, with the finals just about to be wrapping up shortly. Once again, $5 bet, let it hit, and then $200 in bonus bets are coming your way. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. Still remembering how to do podcasts, ad reads, things of that nature. So
process.
Finally, at 11 o'clock on Friday, somewhere around there, the judge Claudia Wilkin came through, and she was like, "So it is decided. The House settlement is settled, and college athletics has changed forever." We've been talking about this for months and months and months and months and months now, and preparing people for exactly kind of what this is going to look like. And as far as I'm concerned, is in the ruling from Judge Wilkin, nothing is particularly different from what we thought. Now we get the reaction. How do the schools handle it? How do the athletic directors handle it? And what happens next?
Well, there were a couple of things, and most of the intrigue, the surprise at this point, I think involved the NIL end of it, because we know about rev share, and it's going to start on July 1st, just like we knew it was going to, barring some kind of a complete bombshell from the judge. First of all, let's just back up for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's like 10 o'clock Friday night, June 6th. The Women's College World Series is on ESPN. I don't know what else is going on Friday night. And here comes one of the biggest stories in the history of college athletics coming to a head. Why?
I don't know.
Why is this happening on now? All of the big media sites at the Athletic, we had it, the ESPN, On3, everybody, they had their stories ready. So it wasn't like, oh my gosh, there's huge news. I got to get in front of usually if you're going to go for if the government does, a big Friday night news dump, it's because you're trying to maybe downplay the reaction. That the media is not at work, and you're going to minimize whatever kind of blowback came as a result of this big
Friday news dump. Yeah.
Yes, but we all knew this was coming, and the stories were in the queue, and you just had to hit publish. So why are we doing this? I do not understand the timing of that. Do it at noon on a Thursday or something, but whatever. The judge is going to do judge things and not conform to the way that the public wants it, I suppose. Regardless, we got the House settlement, and I think the biggest point of contention, the biggest item that people now have to react to is how to manage the NIL side of it with this NIL Go clearinghouse, where any deal in excess of $600 needs to go through a clearinghouse, an approval process. And most of them, as they've existed in recent years under the terms of the new settlement, are going to get denied. They're not going to be allowed. You cannot pay someone $3 million just to come be your quarterback. They can get rev share in that vein, but they can't. But that's all got to be divided up among all of the athletes on your campus. You can't get money from outside of the school just to come play. It's got to be actual NIL, apparently. So,
yeah.
And there's some dates. There's some stuff that's some deadlines that have already passed. If you were going to have an old school NIL deal for the 2025-26 academic year, you needed to do it right away.
Yeah, so, that's why everybody this summer in the for instance, in the basketball transfer portal, they were rushing to get deals done, so that way they could get those guys, funnel those guys money and have it in the old school way of NIL, which was just a little bit it's supposed to be the same thing, but there's some more stringent rules, this time around, and the clearinghouse will evaluate. Now, will they? How is this going to be taken to court and to task immediately?
Yes.
100%. Absolutely. Like this whole thing in college athletics over the last, 5-7 years, as far as player movement is concerned, athlete movement and athlete spending, earnings ability. That's what this whole thing has been surrounded around. So limiting that in any way, shape, or form, probably going to have a difficult time, getting that one through. So we'll see how this actually looks once it goes into function here after, maybe a month or a half a year or a year or something like that. But that is the way it's laid out. I guess have doubts as to what it's going to look like.
We're still going to be in this period of limbo for a little bit to try to determine what's actually going to happen. And there was some talk earlier this spring about the governing body of schools. Well, it's not the NCAA, but like a group, kind of a new group coming together, getting every school on board to agree that they were not going to sue, that they were not going to try to get around the terms of the settlement. And that, of course, has also met some resistance. It involved some language saying, no, you cannot have a state law that allows you to pay your quarterback or your star softball pitcher $2 million. By the way, Nyjah Kennedy from Texas Tech, one of the most famous and really like inspiring NIL stories that's out there, is in the circle pitching for a national championship when the House settlement came down, which I think is a bit disrespectful to her and her people. No, right. Is it not? Am I wrong on this?
You could have at any point, right? You could have done it 12 hours later. You could have done it 9 a.m. on Saturday, and it would have been fine. But like we have a national championship game going on.
So I think she came back to the dugout, and they're like, "Hey, don't tell Nyjah that she's only got 6 hours to work out her new NIL deal for next year, or it's going to go from $1.2 million to $600." Like, I mean, I realize that probably didn't happen, and I'm maybe oversimplifying it a bit, but Troy Dannon came out with a statement, I don't know, just short of midnight on Saturday morning, saying today's decision in the House case represents the latest step in the ongoing evolution of college athletics. Nebraska has spent the past year planning for this resolution and ensuing changes ahead. I can't read. We are supportive of this settlement and fully committed to participating and revenue sharing with our student athletes to best position Nebraska for future competitive success. In the word salad.
Yeah, so you get to find out now, like who's going to fund. I mean, there was already some athletic directors who came out and were really gray about what they were, how many scholarships they were going to fund and stuff like that. Like, so now we get to really find out, what means what to who, and that I think is a really big deal.
Be assured, what it means for Nebraska football is that it will be fully funded. Nebraska may not go to the full 105 on scholarships. In fact, probably won't, because it wants to have some walk-ons. For the short term, it will be allowed to grandfather in players. There's a designated list of players that Nebraska will have to submit here. There's a date, like early July, somewhere around there. And those players can be grandfathered in. So if it says 12 to 15 players, these players would have been cut under the 105 if it had been a hard line 105. We're designating them as our grandfathered players. They're free. They're not going to count against the 105 no matter where they finish their college careers. So if Nebraska wants to put Dylan Raiola and Emmett Johnson on that list, it can. You can put anybody on that list because they can't tell you that you weren't going to cut that player. It will likely be true to form and be the traditional walk-on types. How many Nebraska puts on the list will be interesting because that's going to then tell us what the roster size is in the 2025 season. My guess is that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15. So Nebraska sits around 120 this year. And you would be better served to put young players on that list because then you can count 15 through the duration or whatever the number is through the duration of their careers. That'll be something to follow. And will Nebraska and other schools release the list? I don't know. I don't think they're going to want to release the list of designated players, but They may be forced to. They may not. All these things are yet to be determined.
Yep. So one of the sports, I mean, all the sports get caught up in this. Baseball.
Oh, yes.
So
Okay.
Nebraska baseball gets they had some transfer portal movement over the last week. We'll update Mitch on that, and then we could bring some of this house settlement stuff into that conversation as well after this.
All right, back with you Monday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Thanks for staying with us through last week as we took a break, and we are back. We are back, baby, in full force. You got 5 episodes this week. Connor and I are going to be crazy busy this week. My vacation was planned strategically so that I was ready to return for the College World Series. There are 7 teams that have punched their tickets to the College World Series. We're waiting on the winner of the Murray State Duke Super Regional, which is tonight, Monday night. So cool field to quickly step away from Nebraska. And we're going to talk about Nebraska baseball, so this is fitting. Cool field. Hey, if Nebraska baseball, if you want to like be, woe is me about Nebraska baseball, and say like, oh, they can never compete in this new environment. Like watch ESPN tonight and check out Murray State and Duke, because one of those teams is going to be playing in the College World Series in your state here on Friday or Saturday. So I believe it would be Saturday. Murray State Duke are in the second bracket. They have weather maybe in the case of Duke. Where's Murray State located?
It's in Kentucky or Tennessee.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, they got some weather advantages over Nebraska, and that's about it when it comes to baseball. So you got, well, I'm not going to go through the list, but I'll tell you that Dave Van Horn's coming back. I'll tell you that LSU, everyone's favorite team to the spectacle, the Tigers are coming. Yep. Oregon State without a conference is coming. UCLA from the Big Ten, which Nebraska dispatched in the Big Ten tournament, is coming in. There are no teams from last year's field, which is the first time since like the 1950s that there will not be a repeat visitor from one year to the next. That's crazy. Cool. I like it. Last year we had the all ACC SEC series. This year we've got I don't know what it says about college sports.
It's totally new. It's totally new and totally different. We'll see what that ends up, what that ends up actually looking like in Omaha. Maybe the crowds are a little bit different. I mean, for a while there in the middle of the day, as we were getting participants in the College World Series, there was 5 teams from 5 different conferences. Cool. We're looking at 2 SEC teams at the moment, and we're talking about a handful plus of different leagues here. So
this is why in college sports. Yeah, it is cool. This is why in college sports, you don't overreact to something that happens in one year, because last year at this time, people were screaming that college baseball is dead. It's 2 leagues. That's it. Nobody's ever going to make it to Omaha or win a national championship ever again outside of the SEC or the ACC. And you can just forget about it. Everybody else ought to just like completely fold up shop. Here comes Arizona from the Big 12. UTSA was in a super regional. It's not dead. Like, things can happen, and there's some value, I think, as we saw in some different regionals and super regionals, in having teams that stay together and being able to build a roster and keep those players together, because baseball is a team sport. And if you have chemistry, if you have togetherness, if you've got a team that gets hot and believes in itself, like Coastal Carolina, which has won an ungodly consecutive number of games as it comes to the Schwab this weekend, you can win. They could win a national championship, even though Arkansas and LSU are going to be the heavy favorites.
So just to add to that, and to go back to the house settlement a little bit as well, here's what's going to happen in college baseball. Here's how this affects college baseball. So college baseball rosters could be up to 40 people. They could only fund 11.7 scholarships. The schools could only fund 11.7 scholarships, but a lot of those SEC schools get, they NIL, they make up for it in NIL. So what happens in 2026, next season for college baseball, is that the roster limits go to 34, but you can fund all of the scholarships. You could fund 34 baseball scholarships if you want to. And there will be some SEC schools that choose to fund 25, 30 baseball scholarships.
And be clear, that counts against your rev share.
Correct.
The scholarship money is part of the $20 million in the rev share. So if you're LSU and you're funding 34 scholarships, sounds great. You're taking money away from football.
Right. Exactly. So that's something that athletic directors and people will have to sort of, deal with as you go into next year. But one of the things here is, as the roster limits get cut back a little bit for baseball, there's going to be, as many as 6 roster spots that are just cut from those SEC schools that are bloated with talent. Where are those players going to go? They're going to end up at schools like Murray State. They're going to end up at schools like Nebraska or UTSA and stuff like that. So I find that kind of interesting as to how that all will shape out. And so, speaking of Nebraska, they had some movement last week. So Riley Silva, Robbie Bolin, Cade Brumbaugh, Kale Frost all went into the transfer portal. Caden Brumbaugh ended up at Oklahoma, which we haven't talked since Nebraska got beat 17-1 to get eliminated from the NCAA tournament in Chapel Hill. More than a week.
I'm just going to pretend like I didn't even know that happened.
Yeah, 17-1. That was the real live score. And then Caden Brumbaugh ends up on Oklahoma's roster by the end of the week.
Awesome. So way to add insult to injury right there. Like, we're going to whoop you twice in the regional and then take one of your best players.
Tough.
Yeah.
They did get a transfer pitcher from Mississippi State into the program.
So the new Mississippi State coach, Brian O'Connor, who came over, the Council Bluffs native, who came over from Virginia, he there's going to be some attrition, some moves at Mississippi State, and Nebraska is the beneficiary of one of the first.
So a lot of this, I wonder, people were trying to tell me that, like, that's 3 guys that you're starting lineup, from last year. And people are like, well, the numbers, they needed to get guys off their, of course they need to get guys off their roster. And there are some more guys who didn't really play last year for Nebraska who ended up in the transfer portal as well that we haven't mentioned. They had like 10 guys in there, but we were only talking about the 3 or 4 main ones. They're not letting those guys loose, like they would like to have starters back from in their starting lineup for next year. And it just didn't end up that way. So I find it kind of interesting as to what that might mean for Nebraska in 2020.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with Brumbaugh and Silva and Bolin, who was a hero in the Nebraska's run to get to the NCAA tournament. I don't know what happened with those guys. So it's tough to speculate, but it took basically a miracle for Nebraska just to get into the postseason, and then it was not competitive against an SEC team in the postseason. So if you're a player like that who has the opportunity to go somewhere like an SEC school or a College World Series contender, I understand. I understand what you're doing. Nebraska baseball is not Nebraska football at this juncture. And that's a weird thing to say because Nebraska football is not Nebraska football, but Nebraska baseball is not Nebraska volleyball. Maybe is a better way to put it. Like, they have a ways to go to be able to be a team that can compete for the top. And we saw it. So these guys want to have a chance to win a championship, and they didn't feel like Nebraska was the place to give that to them. But we have to see how it all comes out in the wash, because remember the conversation that we were having in December about Nebraska football when Jamari Butler went in the portal, when Prince William Mellon went in the portal, and others. And we've seen this in the past with Ernest Hausman. Like, now you have to rebound. Like, Will Bolt is going to go out and do work, and starting here this week with the pitcher from Mississippi State. So who can you replace those players with? You got new resources in terms of rev share to work with. So go out there and fill those spots and become a better team through the transfer portal than what you were in 2025.
Yep. You got opportunity. That's for sure. All right. So that was go ahead.
One more thing. If you want to look to a coach on campus who can do that and use the portal to his advantage, how about this news over the weekend?
Good one.
AJ Ferrari is coming to Nebraska. And you may not know that name. I knew the name, even though I'm not a minute by minute follower of Nebraska wrestling. I know that the Nebraska wrestling team finished second at the NCAA championships in March. And I know that AJ Ferrari is a former national champion at Oklahoma State, who is a flamboyant on the mat kind of guy, extremely well known, spent a short time. I'm not even sure if he's on the roster. I think so. Maybe at Iowa. Am I wrong about that? And then was at Cal State Bakersfield. He has a connection to Iowa. I don't know what it is. And was at Cal State Bakersfield this past year. Nebraska, at least in like what I had heard, and I hadn't heard a lot, but I didn't even know that it wasn't on my radar that Nebraska was even in the conversation to get that guy. And here he goes coming to Nebraska. So it's out there. Opportunity is out there, whether you're Will Bolt or Matt Rhule or whomever. Mark Manning showed you. Go out and get the best players. Sell your program. Put your program in position to get people like that, and you can win championships in this college sports environment.
All right, we'll have more of our bearings back throughout the rest of the week. Appreciate you sticking with us, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen. Today, for your second listen, you can check out the Portal Show with Brian Smith. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.